What's up, gangsters? I just started a new project a couple of days ago, and the more I started working with it, the more I felt like I wanted to talk about it. And the reason being because this is a Tamiya kit, specifically their 1/32 scale Spitfire. And it is just wonderful. So wonderful that, like I said, I felt the need to wax rhapsodic about it. Now this video is kind of aimed at two different audiences. One is if you've never built anything from these guys and you wonder what all the hype is about, this will give you a pretty good idea. Or if you have built it and you love it, then this will help you know why you love it. So I think this will be, hopefully this will be interesting. But before I take one word further, let me just say this. Because I had a guy, he commented on one of my videos a while back that I had basically ruined the entire presentation because I insisted on mispronouncing Tamiya. So, look, whether you say it Tamiya, 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 or as the guy from HobbyLink Japan who actually lives there and works with the people at Tamiya says it, Tamiya or Tamiya, what, I can't remember how he's, anyway, however you say it, nobody gives a shit. It doesn't matter. Say it however you want to. It's all good. Everybody has their thing. I think that I probably, without even being conscious of it, switch back and forth between Tamiya and Tamiya. I don't know. Anyway, it is what it is. Don't give me a bunch of hate if you don't like the way I pronounce it. That doesn't matter. Anyhow, let's take a quick look at some of the things about this particular kit that really highlight why Tamiya is so good at what they do and why they're so much fun to build. Alright, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this part because this is really about model kit engineering. But for me, it starts with the instruction book. And these guys are just really good. One thing that I like is that they just don't care about wasting paper or killing trees. As you can see, this one is something like 30 pages long. And that's because they create nice, large illustrations. They break down each step in an intelligent way that lets you really get a good look at how it's supposed to go together. It's not always 100% clear. It would be nice if sometimes they would give you some views of the parts after they're assembled, so that you can see a little bit better how they're actually supposed to look once you've glued them together. But that's a pretty minor gripe. Overall, I don't think anybody does instruction books as well as Tamiya. Now, the next place that you go where you start to get the feel for how good a kit is going to be in terms of engineering are the sprues. And this kit has many of them, many parts. I think this thing overall is something like 350 or so parts. It's a lot. So there's quite a few things we can look at here that really illustrate how good they are. And I'm going to just pull out a few and try to give you guys a really close-up look at some of these things. This is a good one to talk about just overall levels of detail. Or I should say overall levels of detail and molding quality. One thing that you're just pretty much never going to see with a Tamiya kit is flash. It just almost never happens. And that's just a testament to how good their molds are and how much care they take in engineering them and producing them. But another reflection of that is the crispness and the quality of the surface detail. You can see that these panel lines and rivets are just super, super crisp and very delicate. Now you can argue about whether or not panel lines and rivets should even be included at the scale that these aircraft kits are built at, but look, that's just, I mean, to me it's kind of a silly thing to argue about, because the bottom line is, if they didn't have them, they would just be pretty boring and not nearly as much fun to paint and look at when you're done. But if you are going to have them, they need to be really crisp and not, you know, just huge and grossly overscale like some other companies. Airfix and Revell are two notable examples I can think of where the panel lines and the rivet detail are just really, really huge. If you like that style, cool. But if you want something that's at least a little more realistic, nobody beats Tamiya in that regard. Another thing that you can see from this is the quality of the surface finish. No texture to speak of. It's not really super polished out like Hasegawa plastic is. It's got a nice matte finish to it, but still very smooth and nothing that's going to interfere with you getting a good finish out of your paint. All right, next thing. Okay, next thing is sprue layout. Have you ever built a kit where it seemed like you were having to go to half a dozen different sprues just to build a simple subassembly like an engine? Well, for the most part, you won't find that with a Tamiya kit. Like this one, for example, is for the Merlin engine that comes in the Spitfire. And all of the parts, as far as I know anyway, on this sprue are Merlin parts, or engine compartment parts. Obviously, you've got a firewall there, but you've got engine bearers, you've got lots of plumbing. It's not necessarily all part of the engine block itself, but it's all related to that area of the plane, and that matches what you find in the instructions. So it's nice to find all of your parts handy to get to. Now, they're not perfect. I know when I was building the cockpit parts of this Spitfire kit, that everything came from one sprue except for the rudder pedals. I don't know what happened there. It's almost like somebody just forgot, and then they went like, oh shit, we forgot the rudder pedals. And they were over on a sprue with some like pieces of bombs or something. It was a weird deal. So yeah, nobody's perfect, but still, you get the idea. The other thing that you start to notice when you begin to work with the sprues and clip parts off of them is gate design. Now, gate design is a thing, and it typically happens after all of this stuff is engineered and laid out. It may even be something that gets thrown over the wall to the mold maker, and the engineers that do all of this stuff don't even have anything to do with it. And that's just one of those situations where things can go badly for the model maker because the guy who actually designs the gates has never even built a model, doesn't know why that's a thing for us and why we care about it. But however Tamiya does it, they do a pretty nice job of it. You'll see that not only are the sprue gates nice and small, you can see all of these. None of them are just really offensively huge. They're appropriately sized for the size of the parts. They're also placed in locations that make good sense, like with these detail parts. I mean, you'd think this is pretty common sense, and most kit makers do a relatively good job of this. I think Kitty Hawk is maybe the most famous for putting gate stubs in really stupid places. You don't have to be a real genius to know that you want the gate stub to be on a piece of that, on a part of that little piece that's not going to show up after it's assembled. But sometimes you don't have any choice. You have a part that exists in two halves. Like, for example, these two parts of the supercharger intake. You got an upper and a lower half. And you don't have any choice really but to put a gate on the edge where the seam is going to be. And you know, look, you very well may be adding some filler and doing some seam dressing on that anyway, so a gate stub there is not a super big deal. Now, one thing that they do that is a little harder to show, well, maybe I can show it on these wing pieces. Let me look here. Yeah. So this is something that I don't know if you could really call it a trend, or if this is something that Tamiya started, or what, but some people really like this. I think it's sort of limited value, and I'll explain why. This is called undergating. Okay, if you look right here, you will see that the gate attaches to the part on the mating surface. All right, that obviously is going to be where this lower part of the wing mates with the upper part of the wing, and you can see on the upper half that they've done it that way there as well. Now the idea behind that is that if the entire gate is located on that mating surface, that it's not going to screw you up as badly when it comes to the external appearance of the part and achieving a nice looking seam. And I understand that logic, but to me it's of limited value because, like with this leading edge of this wing, you're going to be, I assume anyway, that most builders who want a good result are going to be filling and sanding that seam anyway. Even as good as it is on a Tamiya kit, it's still going to be there and it's still going to have to be addressed. So for me, it's kind of 6 of one, half a dozen of the other as far as the utility of having it on the mating face. And sometimes I actually don't like it because it can screw up the joint, and you end up having to deal with that. Again, not really a big deal, not a major gripe. What is a major gripe is some kit manufacturers I've seen don't really seem to understand the strategy in the first place, and they make the gate stub where it is both on the outer surface and on the mating surface. And then you have basically not only not helped yourself, but you've doubled the problem. So that's not good. But fortunately, that's not something that you will see with a Tamiya kit. Now, gate location is something that even the best manufacturer will sometimes not do a great job of. Sorry, I'm trying to stash these sprues while I pull them out of the box. Sometimes even the best companies will make odd decisions about gate locations. And Tamiya is no exception. And if I can find the right sprue, I'll show you what I mean. Okay, I found it. This one is still in the bag, and I guess that's a point to say something that I know some people don't like about Tamiya kits, and that is that they use staples for all of their little bags. I don't know, personally it doesn't really bother me, but I guess if you're going to find something to not like, that at least has reasons. Okay, so this is the sprue with the exhaust stubs, and this is a common complaint with this kit in particular. If you look at the exhaust stubs, you can see that the gate location, yeah, it's right there on the outside visible surface of the stub. And that's a bit annoying if you are so fanatical about detail on this thing that you want to see the weld line, because these exhaust stubs were made in 2 parts that were welded together along the center. I'm not that fanatical about it, but I also don't want to deal with cleaning up that gate remnant on all 12 of the stubs. The ideal location would be only right here on the attachment point, because you just clip that off, and assuming you do a good job of it, it still fits in the rectangular hole that it fits into. I don't think it really needs both gates, but obviously somebody in charge of mold engineering disagrees with me. I don't know though. Right here you can see it only has the one, and it filled just fine. No short shots. So I don't know, that's debatable. But the point being is that nobody is 100% perfect on this stuff. And again, they may have their reasons where they say, yeah, this is right, this is what we had to do, and I just may have a different engineering opinion. That happens. Now, this is also a good point to talk about. Part of how Tamiya gets such good detail is that they are very willing to use slide molding. Now, slides are not a new thing. Some people in scale modeling seem to think that they are, but slides have been around for a long time. It's just that it's a technology that's matured like lots of others, and it has gotten less expensive. And so more model making companies, especially smaller ones, are able to use slide molding technology to create detail like the open end of these exhaust stubs. Now, for a little injection molding 101, if you don't know what a slide mold is or how it works, it's pretty simple. Let's say that I want to create this anvil-shaped part. Obviously, if I'm going to make an injection mold of that, the simplest thing to do is have a mold that's in two halves that opens and closes this way, right? That's pretty obvious. When you open the mold, the ejector pins fire and they pop the thing out, no big deal. But what if you want to mold these four holes into the base of the thing at the same time? Well, that's a bit of a problem, because obviously you need a steel pin in the mold to make that hole, right? And so if your mold is trying to open this way, and that steel pin is locked in the material which flowed around it, obviously when you open the mold, you're going to rip the steel pin through the side of the part like this, and that obviously is going to be a bad day, right? So what do? Well, you have to make that steel pin where it will move. So let me see, I need an instructional aid here. All right, let's say that this paintbrush handle is the said steel pin, all right? When the mold shuts, the steel pin needs to be sticking out in there like that. And as the mold opens, somehow that steel pin has to withdraw at the same time that the two halves of the tool are moving apart. And they do that either with hydraulics, where basically it's just on a hydraulic actuator, and right before the tool opens, it goes psh, and pops that pin out like that. Or they use basically a spring-loaded mechanism that's basically it uses cams and levers and things so that it's timed perfectly such that as the two halves of the mold start to separate, then this pin will withdraw. They also use these little things called lifters, and that's most likely what they used on something like this that's really shallow. And all a lifter is it's basically a piece of spring steel. It's like a blade, like a skinny blade, and it's basically got a little ramp on it so that the blade, which has a protrusion on the end of it that makes this hole, actually just flexes out of the way just enough to withdraw the pin from the hole as the tool opens. And lifters are really common, and they're a lot cheaper than actually having to do an entire slide action. So anyway, that's just really common stuff, and that's one reason why Tamiya is able to get some of the really nice fidelity on parts like this that they do. But you know, even so, these exhaust stubs are not enough to my liking that they kept me from running out and buying the Quick Boost resin parts. And obviously, even this is going to be a little bit of a hassle because even though they attached them all in a way that's perfect for painting, 4 of them fell off and I'll have to deal with that. So at any rate, that's a little bit of injection molding 101 and how Tamiya gets some of the detail that they do. Now, once you're done with the sprues, though, you actually start gluing things together. And for me, that's when the real joy starts. Because all of those things that I've talked about could be true, and yet parts still wouldn't fit together properly. But you don't have to spend very long with a Tamiya kit before you realize that's not going to be a problem. Let's take this example right here, okay? This is the fuselage of the little Spitfire. Now, if you've already built this, then you know the answer. If you haven't, the challenge is find the joint between the two parts that make up what you're looking at right here. Yeah, right, I know. You're like, what? That's not 2 parts. That's all 1 part. Why would it even be 2 parts? Well, the bottom line is that with Spitfires, this is a Mark 9C, and the Mark 8 had a retractable tail wheel. And Tamiya wanted to make it possible for them to release a Mark 8 kit, and so they wanted a separate section back here around the tail wheel that would allow them to include a different piece that could be installed here for a Mark 8. So when you flip this over, you can see that indeed it is a second part right there, and you can see how it joins. But look at the quality of the joint, all right? I didn't do anything other than take the pieces out of the box and glue them together in step 1. It's literally the first thing you do with this kit. And look at the quality of that joint. Look how good it is. I mean, I got a little bit of extra thin in there that I might want to clean out just to make sure that panel line looks consistent. But, I mean, really, come on. That is just insane how good the fit is right there. And it's not just luck. It happens on both parts. I mean, this one is even better because I didn't have quite as much glue in there. That's just phenomenal. And it's a great way to start the kit because immediately, I mean, before you're even 2 steps into the thing, you already get the idea that this is going to be a lot of fun because everything just fits together so well. I am somehow getting oil paint from a little container I have over here. It's still sitting out on my bench, on my fingers, and of course on these parts. Not a big deal. Winsor Newton Payne's Gray takes a long time to dry, so let's wipe that off. The question is, which finger is it on? Because I can't see it. Anyway. Anyway, that's where things really get fun, is when you actually start putting stuff together. And for me, sort of the ultimate test of how good a company is at engineering their model kits is how well they can be dry fit. It's just really, really nice when you can dry fit parts together to see that everything is going to happen the way that it's supposed to before you commit to glue. And this is where Tamiya just really shines. Take a look at this, okay? Whoops, that fell off. This is the cockpit sub-assembly that I've been working on. And I promise you that I have done no adjusting to any of these parts, okay? I sanded off a few sprue gates. I sanded off the instrument panel face to accept the Yahoo aftermarket panel I'm going to put on there. But otherwise, I drilled out. Tamiya did not include all of the lightning holes in these formers, so I drilled all those out, drilled out the holes in the flare rack, but otherwise I have made no adjustments to any of these parts. All right, and you can see that this one wasn't quite tight enough to stay stuck on there, but look, there we go. That's that sub-assembly. This one is obviously loose. This whole business right here, the seat was loose. That I've gone ahead and glued in because that'll be easy to paint up like that. This, all right, complete with sort of movable, I don't know why they don't want you to glue that, but sort of movable joystick. Anyway, this little thing here, that pops right off. Then this sub-assembly with the joystick on it pops out of there, and so does the sub-assembly with the rudder pedals on it. I mean, look at that. That is just phenomenal. I mean, I guess it's kind of trivial because why would you really need to do that? Well, you don't. But the point is that this lets you make sure that everything is going to go together before you commit to paint. Because I'm now going to go off and work on painting all of these sub-assemblies before I bring them back together in the finished cockpit sub-assembly. Now, that's a point to mention that one thing you have to watch out for with Tamiya, because their tolerances are so close, is that if you get too much paint on mating surfaces, you can screw up some of that beautiful fit. So that is something that you have to watch out for. But look, that's a trade I'll make any day, because especially if you're using lacquer, I almost don't even bother to remove the paint between mating surfaces. I just put the parts together, apply some Tamiya extra thin, because I know that it's going to dissolve right through the lacquer paint and get into the plastic and provide me with a good enough joint on little bitty parts like this that I don't have to worry about it. So anyway, there you go. That's kind of the coup de grace, hopefully I pronounced that correctly, that for me, it tells the real story about why we love Tamiya so much. Here's a quick addendum that I thought was worth adding, because of course I forgot something. One of the things that I really also love about Tamiya is that they do a good job of not committing one of my pet peeves with model kit engineering, and that is making it possible to put parts in backwards. It's really simple to fixture the attachment points on a part so that it can only go in one way. And so even if you're a dumbass or you just fail to read the instructions properly, like I occasionally do, you still can't put the thing together wrong. I've built, I think now, almost a dozen Tamiya kits, and so that adds up to probably 1,000 Tamiya parts, and I've honestly only found a couple that could go in backwards. So I really like that. That just shows thoughtful engineering on their part. As you can see, I've got this little Spitfire cockpit dry fit again, and this is another place where that ability to dry fit multiple times really comes in handy, because what I'm doing here is just checking out the location of all of my chipping that I've been doing. You can see some of it there on the cockpit door, and just looking for goobers. And this is the place where I came across one of those good news, bad news things. The good news is that Tamiya parting line witnesses are so fine that you can barely see them. The bad news is that they're so fine you can barely see them, and you may not until after you've painted it. See that on that top of that rail there next to the seat there? Yeah, you can see the parting line witness. I'm going to have to scrape that off and repaint that. So, no big deal. Anyway, there you go. More good things. Okay, so there you go. One of my favorite subjects, good kit engineering. If you guys have listened to much of my nonsense, you know that I have a mechanical engineering background, and I've got some experience in injection molding specifically and product design. So it's a subject I love. But what it really boils down to for me is that I love to paint even more than I love to build. And I like to get to the painting thing as efficiently and as drama-free as possible. And nobody provides that experience better than Tamiya. Now, yes, there are other companies that do a pretty good job. In fact, this produced some spirited discussion in Scale Modeler's critique group yesterday when I proposed that Tamiya is better at this than everybody else. The subject of wingnut wings came up, and I know their stuff is very good, and I'm anxious to experience that for myself. I've got their Sopwith camel kit right down here in my stash, and at some point I'm going to feel brave enough to tackle a World War I biplane and all of its rigging. But I am anxious to see how the engineering compares with Tamiya. Other kits, look, I added it up the other day. I have 29 projects under my belt in the last 4 years, with a couple underway at the moment, both of which happen to be Tamiya kits, the Spitfire, and the Honda 1/6 scale Monkey, which I have built before. So of 31 projects, roughly a third of them have been Tamiya kits. I think I have 11 or 12. I've built 4 Hasegawa kits. I've built a couple of Revell Germany kits. And then I have like one each from Mini Art, Airfix, let's see, Trumpeter, Special Hobby, let's see, what else, Heller, Thunder Model, Dragon, actually there's actually 5 Hasegawa kits. I forgot about the OG one, the old Mustang kit that I built. And I think that pretty well covers it. And there's some resin kits in there as well that don't really, they don't fit in the same conversation. Anyway, as I build these things, I kind of have like this 100-point scoring system in my head. And that's kind of how I compare them. And, a lot of those kits barely make it out of the 80s for me. There's quite a few in there that are like 85 or something like that. There's unfortunately some that never made it to 80. and by the way, this is a real informal and unscientific scoring system. I don't, write down notes about it or anything. It's just sort of, kind of a loose comparison. But all of the Tamiya kits that I have built have been well into the 90s. This one, I think the best it could be is a 99 because, as I showed you, there are a couple of things that are not quite, in my opinion, perfect, but man, so damn close. The only exception, and this is where my argument sort of falls apart because it's kind of aircraft centric. The only exception has been the Tamiya 934 Porsche Turbo that I built. That thing was an aggravation. It had some really stupid engineering decisions in it. Things like the headlights and the headlight bezels being molded as one part, which made a masking nightmare. Same thing with all the rubber trim that goes around the body on that Porsche. Another masking nightmare. It was almost like somebody other than Tamiya, or like maybe they had a B team or something, did all the engineering on that thing. And I've been told that that's a relatively old mold that got updated at some point in recent history, but that they didn't really change it very much. So, there's some forgiveness for it being an older tool because they've obviously learned a lot as time has gone by. Tamiya has a 40-year history of doing this stuff. But I built their Kubelwagen, which is from the 70s. And even though the detail on it wasn't all that great, it still fit together and went together really nicely. So they've just been doing a really good job overall from the very beginning, which is, that's why they have such longevity and why they're so popular. But at any rate, that just gives you a little bit of an idea about how I think about these things overall. and why, when I'm building or when I'm doing some of these little videos, I talk about Tamiya engineering and why I'm so occasionally derisive about other companies and their engineering. At any rate, it's just the way I see it. It's just what I like. You may disagree, and I would certainly welcome your comments either way. At any rate, if you've watched this whole thing, as always, I really appreciate it, and much love.